Wait for all the people to get in here. Hi, right here. May, come here. Hop up. Come on. Okay. Hey. Hey, there they are. Good morning, guys. Happy Wednesday. Hold on. If y'all can hear that, that's my cat. He likes to play Spider-Man on the bottom of our couch. And he gets bored. Hey, buddy. He's learned not to scratch the top of it or he gets in trouble, but the underside is fair game. So hey. This is a good day to be inside. I'll give Freddie a couple minutes. All right. Well, I saw y'all's test results. Y'all all did very well. I was very pleased with how test ended up going. I think everybody's taking it. So what we may do next time, I didn't really plan for this time, is we may go over some of the harder test questions, but it seems like I think the average is in the 80s. So there weren't too many that you guys had trouble with, which is good. It's very encouraging. I'm glad that you all took the time to do well. But the plan for today, so we, the last time we did lecture was last week. And so we got into like midway through chapter 5-ish. So that one is about learning. We will do the Kahoot first today, mix it up a little bit because I know more of you guys are here at the beginning of class. So we'll be able to do that and we'll use that as our review for the things that we did last time and then pick up close-ish to where we left off in chapter 5 and then hopefully get through all of chapter 5 or if not get relatively close to being done with the lecture on chapter 5. I realized before I started class that I never posted the lecture from last week. So I will do that today along with the one from today. Let's see, I'm trying to think any other housekeeping notes. You will have an assignment on Sunday, a little short one, nothing to worry about. I will brief you more on that probably Friday because I have to go out of town Friday night. So I'll probably try and do that either Thursday, like tomorrow afternoon or Friday. That's the main stuff, I think. If y'all have any questions about anything, feel free to reach out to me. I try and get back to you guys as quickly as I can. I think you guys are all caught up almost all the way to the other classes who meet twice a week, which is good. So with all that said, we are going to start this week, like I said, our Kahoot. There you go. Yeah. So a couple people coming in. All right, there we go. Go a couple minutes to enter the lobby. We'll do this just like we do all the other classes. We'll do this for a bit, probably shortly after the Kahoot, because I'm going to use this as our review time, probably talk a little bit more about the answers than I normally would. And then we'll take a break, and then we will come back. Still waiting on a couple more folks. Let's give y'all another minute. So I don't know if y'all can hear the rain and the wind. They're both smacking up against the side of our house. Poor Mayday, she gets a little afraid of the rain. She's gonna be extra clingy today. All right, let's get started. Reviewing chapter 5, part 1. All right, so B.F. Skinner was a part of the behaviorist perspective. He was one of the most famous behaviorists that ever did it. So when we say he introduced the idea of reinforcement, that's not exactly right. So he more was one of the first people who codified it and like studied it in a lab setting. And according to Skinner, like he wasn't all that interested in psychology that couldn't be studied in an experimental design. So I think we talked a little bit last time about like the Skinner boxes, where he would like put a rat inside a box and try and condition the rat to hit a lever a certain number of times so it would get a treat. That is pretty classic, not classical, but classic behavior, operant conditioning behaviorism. And so B.F. Skinner is, and that relies on reinforcement and punishment. We talked a little bit about that last time as well. That is the idea that if you do something well and you get rewarded for it, you will be incentivized to do it well again. Or if you are punished for doing something bad, you will stop doing it. Things like that. Little Albert study. This is not a picture of little Albert. This is just some wood. Little Albert was a tiny human. All right, so I just instantly, I don't expect you guys to like knock this out of the park because I know it's been like a week since we talked about any of this stuff. So little Albert was a very famous experiment. Well, he was a baby. Real name probably not Albert. That would violate the code of ethics if we knew what this kid's actual name was. But the idea was that they would pair something like a very loud sound, like a banging sound, with the presence of a white rat initially, and see if they could condition this little kid to be afraid of the rat. And it turns out, yep, yes, they can. It was very effective. And so much so that they could generalize that effectiveness out to other animals. So it wasn't just a white rat. You could do like a white dog, white rabbit, and the kid would still get afraid. And this would definitely not pass any kind of ethical review today. Like this experiment would not happen, but still very important in the pantheon of psychology to understand that yes, fear can be conditioned in humans, even from an early age. which seems kind of common sensey, but still needed to be reinforced by research. Learning by watching others. What do we call that? That is observational learning. Very good. Learning by observing. It's one of the three main types of learning that we're going to talk about in our learning unit. Operant conditioning and classical conditioning are the other two. When observational learning, we pick up behaviors by watching other people do them. And we're very good at this, especially when we're little and we're watching our parents. That's why we take on a lot of their behaviors, a lot of their mannerisms, things like that, because we observe what they do. And with repeated exposure to it, we internalize that behavior and then exhibit that behavior. What's positive reinforcement? Speed round, go. I just forgot to change the time domain. That's all right. We're just going to talk about it anyway. I appreciate everybody getting their answer here last second. And most of you were right. Great job. So positive reinforcement, like it says here, increasing probability the behavior will occur, praising or giving tokens. Okay, so in this example, we have a group of people clapping. Let's assume that they're at like a symphony or an opera or something. And it's fair to say that they enjoyed what they saw. And so to let the performers know that they enjoyed what they saw, they are going to give them praise. They're going to give them positive reinforcement so that ideally they would continue to do that. Cheering is a very good example because if you think about like at a football game, somebody gets a first down or gets an interception or something like that, you cheer them because you would like them to continue doing that, especially if they're your team. All right, so we're trying to connect big figures with their big ideas. They came up with their big brains. So we talked about how Skinner is largely responsible for developing this idea of operant conditioning. Pavlov, very famously, remember his experiment with the dogs and understanding. So Pavlov actually wasn't a psychologist; he was a physiologist. So he was studying the chemistry of the body, and he was studying how dogs digest food and sort of happened across this psychological phenomenon where the dogs would salivate even if like food wasn't present. So that was kind of your clue here with this little poopy, because Pavlov did a very famous experiment with dogs, but he is the father of classical conditioning. So behaviorism is right in the sense that Pavlov is connected to behaviorism, but classical conditioning is more correct in this instance, in this analogy. I like analogy questions a lot. So there will probably be at least one like that on the test. Spontaneous recovery. So every time we play this Kahoot, I have to emphasize that I have no idea who this guy is. He was just on the Kahoot question bank. So it probably means something to somebody out there, but not me. All right, so this is reappearance of a conditioned response. So let's say, like I've taught old May May here how to do a few tricks, and she does know a few tricks, but she sits regularly. She'll come when I call her. She will leave treats if I say leave it, she won't eat it immediately. But let's say for a while, we taught her how to lay down. She knows how to lay down, but we don't do it for a while. So let's say we go a couple months without actually like rehearsing the lay down command. So that association, that conditioning can go away for a little while. And we would call that process extinction because we haven't, continued that conditioning process. But after a while, if we tried it again, even if she's a little confused at first, then she might remember it. She might, be like, oh yeah, I remember, I got a treat that one time for doing this. So let's give it a try again. So that idea that she could, remember how to do something after a while of not making that connection is called spontaneous recovery. So you could spontaneously recover that association without having that much exposure to it. And she would, because she's a good girl. All right, this answer's kind of complicated, but that's why we're here. All right, so conditioned taste aversion. You remember the example they used in the book was those lizards in Australia, the goannas, not to be confused with an iguana, which is native mostly to Central and South America and Florida. But a goanna in Australia, they had this poisonous cane toad that was an invasive species that wasn't native to Australia that they kept eating, and it was killing these goannas. And so to try and decrease that population decline, biologists utilized the psychological principle called conditioned taste aversion, where they would get the iguanas to eat little baby toads so they would get sick instead of killing them. And then eventually they learned that, well, if I eat that, I'm going to get sick. And so they stopped eating the toads. So in this case, the conditioned response is nausea, because like they don't have an immediate response to those toads. That's not their immediate biological response, is to, get sick. But over repeated exposure to eating the little toads, they would get nauseous. And so nobody likes to get nauseous, so they would stop eating the toads, is basically the idea there. I don't know why the wolf is the example here, but you could do this with wolves. You could do this with any organism that eats. All right, what's a primary reinforcer? Good question. All of the above, very good. So primary reinforcers are biological needs. So to live and exist as a human person, you need rest, you need food, you need water. What you don't need necessarily is something like money. Money is a means to those ends. You can buy food, you can buy a place to sleep with money, but you cannot eat money. You can, but I don't recommend it. What's habituation? I'm gonna rescue my water cup. The cap is about to knock it off. This is bored. So habituation, learning to get used to something after a lot of exposure. Okay, another example with my dog here at our old house, we had a garage door because we had a garage. And when we got her initially, she was very afraid of that garage door. But after a while, she got used to the sound, and even associated with her getting to go to like the dog park or something, because we had to open the garage door to get her in the car to take her there. So we call that habituation, because she had repeated exposure to this thing that used to scare her, but she got used to it. So she has habituated that stimuli. Right. There will be questions like this on your next test, which will just be on chapter 5 and chapter 6. So knowing the difference between positive and negative reinforcement is important. We'll talk about a couple of examples. All right, so in positive reinforcement, that one's pretty straightforward. You add something because it's positive. So if we say positive, that doesn't mean good. It means something's being introduced, something's being added to this equation. So in this case, we're giving something pleasant because we're trying to reinforce it. So like we said earlier, if you do well and somebody gives you some kind of reward, so let's say you do well on a test and your parents give you money, that's positive reinforcement because they want you to keep doing well on those tests. Whereas negative reinforcement, again, doesn't mean bad. It just means something's being removed. So I'm removing something from an equation to hopefully encourage a behavior. So I'm reinforcing something, I want that behavior to continue. So the classic example on that is if you've gotten into your car before and you don't put your seatbelt on immediately, what happens? Your car starts beeping at you. So to try and get that beeping to stop, so I'm removing something unpleasant, the beeping sound is unpleasant, I'm going to buckle my seatbelt. So I'm removing something unpleasant to encourage a behavior. So I'm still trying to get that behavior to continue, but in this case, I'm just taking something bad away to make it happen, as opposed to adding something good. If that makes any sense. Yeah, it's easier for me to remember that positive means I'm adding something, reinforcement means I'm trying to encourage a behavior, and then punishment means I'm trying to limit a behavior. Seems intuitive, but it's more complicated in practice, as you guys have found. Can you say hello? Oh, dude, come here. Come on. Hey, buddy. So that's false. So money is a secondary reinforcer because, like I said earlier, money does not fulfill a biological need. It is a means to fulfilling your biological need. So I need food, I need water, I need shelter, all that kind of stuff. And I can get to that stuff with having money, but I cannot utilize money to fulfill any of those needs. Good, Jen. All right, so a fixed interval schedule. This is another one of those things where you have four options. There's a few of those in this chapter. So you have four options. You can either have a fixed interval, fixed ratio, variable ratio. So in this case, fixed means it doesn't change. So there's no change across trials. There's no, one trial it's 1 minute, one trial it's 5 minutes. It's the same. And then interval versus ratio. Interval means amount of time, and then ratio would mean number of trials. So in this case, payday is a good example because payday hopefully comes on the same day every month. So, or every couple of weeks or however often you get paid. So it's a fixed interval. It's the same amount of time every time. You know what to expect. All right. Negative reinforcement. This is the tricky one. All right, so with negative reinforcement, I'm increasing a behavior by removing something undesirable. So let's say I have a headache, and what do you do when you have a headache? You take like ibuprofen or Advil or Tylenol or whatever. So in that case, I'm taking something to remove that negative stimulus. So negative stimulus, headache goes away. That is reinforcing me taking that pill because I am trying to encourage a behavior by removing something undesirable because headaches stink and I'd like to not have them. What is a Skinner box? I don't know why they have this picture of this big scary owl. He would be more likely to hunt the thing that went in the Skinner box, a small rodent. Okay, so Skinner box is a device used to study learning. It's created by B.F. Skinner, as the name would suggest. So it's not teaching the animals to discriminate between stimuli exactly. It's more teaching the animals to exhibit a certain response for a reward. So they're not, as opposed to Pavlov's experiment where they were trying to teach an animal to discriminate between stimuli, they would play a tone at a high pitch and then a tone at a low pitch, and the dogs were supposed to be able to choose between which one would get them their reward. Uh, Skinner was much more just about the reward element. So he was trying to see if the animals could learn to uh, respond to a certain number of trials, or if they would just not be able to figure it out, and they could, because positive reinforcement is a very powerful motivator. All right, what's operant conditioning? How does it apply to Nick Saban? Don't worry, I will explain. Right, operant conditioning is an association of reward and punishment. So in this scenario, presumably Christian Miller, number 47 over here, has done something very silly, and Coach Saban is having a polite but firm conversation with him about how he would like him to stop doing whatever he was just doing. So we would say that that would be, it could be a couple different things. It could be positive punishment. He could be like, okay, Christian, go sit on the bench. He could, bump him down in the depth chart. That would also be positive punishment. He could take away some sort of leadership roles. That would be negative punishment because I'm removing something good. This doesn't look like reinforcement. Coach Saban looked a little angry, but it says the idea here is that either through punishment or reward, he's trying to influence this person's behavior. That is operant conditioning in a nutshell. All right, so stimulus generalization. It is kind of a next step for learning. So the red one is close. So that's more just classical conditioning, because we just have that basic association. Stimulus generalization is sort of a next step for classical conditioning. So I've used an example before of how, like, my dog has made the association that if she has very good hearing because she's a dog, so she can tell the difference between us, opening a microwave and opening the cheese drawer in our fridge. And if it's the cheese drawer, she will come from wherever she is in the house to the kitchen because my girl loves some cheese. But the other drawers in the fridge kind of also sound like the cheese drawer, and the cabinets also kind of sound like the cheese drawer. So every now and then she will, hear those noises and come to the kitchen anyway, because it kind of sounded like that other thing, and maybe I'll get something else, or maybe I'll get some cheese from another place, something like that. So that's basically stimulus generalization, that animals, or people too, can generalize stimuli from that association to a certain point, because after a while you get to this point that we call stimulus discrimination, where they can say, oh, well, that's not the thing I want. But there is a range of stimulus generalization. All right. So this is kind of a complicated question. So neutral stimulus at the beginning of it. So when I started teaching May how to sit, and I looked at her and I said, May, sit. So we'd only had her for a few weeks, and she had no idea what I was talking about, because that's a neutral stimulus. Say a person telling her to sit, which is confusing her right now because she's like, I am sitting. A person telling her to sit is not really part of her natural environment. So that is a neutral stimulus. It doesn't mean anything to her. It will only mean something after we condition her to associate that with a certain behavior. At that point, it becomes the conditioned stimulus. So I have conditioned that behavior to the point that she will actually exhibit it. I don't know if Pokemon is still popular. I don't know if you guys know who these Pokemon are. That's Eevee. Eevee evolves into Vaporeon. But that was the basic idea there. All right, a couple more. So a neutral stimulus and an unconditioned stimulus. Acquisition. Okay, so you have to link these two things. So unconditioned stimulus would be like the food in the Pavlov dog experiment. Neutral stimulus would be like the bell. So the bell doesn't mean anything to the dogs initially, but through this process of acquisition, so this initial learning phase, you can link these two things and then hopefully get the response that you want. So acquisition is also going to become very important when we talk about memory in the next chapter, but that is basically what acquisition means. All right, unconditioned response. All right, so the stomach growling is the unconditioned response. So the unconditioned response, remember, is, so if we're talking about learning in this chapter, the unconditioned response is the response that doesn't require any learning. So there's not been any condition that's taken place here. So a dog smells food or a human smells food, and the stomach starts growling independent of any conditioning. It just happens biologically. That's, we're sort of wired to do that. So we would call that the unconditioned response. The sound of the experimenter's footsteps in this case would actually be the neutral stimulus initially, and then it would become the conditioned stimulus. All right, think about this one carefully. So this is false. Okay, so it is a ratio schedule because we're talking about the number of times and not the amount of time, because if it was an amount of time, it would be an interval schedule. But it's not a variable ratio schedule, because a variable ratio schedule means that it would be a number of times that changed from trial to trial. So maybe in the Skinner box example, in one trial we would give the rat the reward after he hit the lever 5 times, and the next one we would give him the food the next after the 3rd time that he did it. So it's based on number of times, but it's changing from trial to trial. Knowing the difference between those 4 things is going to become very important, because there will be at least a couple of questions on the test like that where you have to distinguish between those 4 options. So I have variable and fixed ratio, and then I have variable and fixed interval. Knowing the difference between those 4 is going to become very important, because I'm going to give you a hypothetical like that and say, okay, which one is this? What's happening here? Okay, it is now 9:19. We're going to take a little break. Good job. We are going to come back at 9:25, and we will talk about the end of chapter 5. All right, sound good? Ready, break. Let's go.